Uh, Hi, everyone. My name is Gabe, and I'm very excited to be here. I'm actually not too far away physically. I'm in Goleta, which is close to Santa Barbara, which is just a couple hours south of here. But I have a new baby here, and the logistics of coming up were just a little bit challenging. So I'm down here and beaming in. Um, has anyone here, just to get a quick sanity check, is anyone here familiar with Frame, or will this got a few people familiar, totally unfamiliar? Both totally good. I love it. Um, Wonderful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give a quick, very quick introduction to Frame, kind of what it is and what it isn't. And I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically how it's being used for education and training and learning, which I know is all of your kind of area of interest. And then finally, I'm just going to talk about some new aspects of the tool that we've designed to kind of specifically help with issues around interfacing data from Frame with things like learning management systems. And then finally, going to look ahead to the future 1 or 2 years and talk a little bit about augmented reality and how we see Frame fitting into the augmented reality future. Whether that future will exist or not remains to be seen, but there's been some interesting nudges in this direction from Apple. And typically when they make a nudge in a direction, it's worth paying attention to. Okay, cool. Well, let's dive in. I think you all can see my screen, and this will just be the whirlwind tour of what Frame is. Frame, fundamentally, it's just a way to come together online in a 3D space that is very quick right from the browser. And I'm going to be looking at a bunch of different spaces today. The overall idea is we try to make it as easy as possible just to get into this thing. So you just put in a link and you're kind of there. Now, the ease of getting into the thing comes with we have to make some sacrifices. Like the avatars don't look photorealistic, for example. They're kind of these sort of cartoony avatars, but you can move around, you can customize them a few ways, you can launch emojis out of them and things like that. Now, once you're in here, of course, you can invite others in just by sharing a link, and then you've got voice chat. The voice chat is spatialized, so you'll hear people louder if you're closer to them, but you've got a megaphone in case you want to blast your audio everywhere. You can set up like specific private audio zones so people can split up and have different conversations. Now, besides the ease of getting into the darn thing, we've tried to also make it easy to customize your space. And you can do this in kind of at a few levels. On the one hand, you just have a ton of different kinds of things you can bring in to your space. And you can give other people edit permission, so multiple people can come in here and be editing at the same time. You can bring in, streaming screens for sharing your webcam or sharing your screen. You can bring in 3D models, either ones that you upload, or we give you a whole library of models you can bring in, or you can browse a library like Sketchfab. You can bring in a web browser. It's actually like a fully functional interactive web browser, like right here in the space that people can click on and interact with for watching videos and things like that. And you can get kind of fancy too with the design of it. You can bring in things like particle systems for rain or snow and shaders and things like that. You can ask polls, which is really cool. So when you ask a poll, everyone sees the question, and as you respond, it fills in a 3D pie chart in front of everyone. And you can also bring in 360-degree photos, which is pretty fun. I'll bring one in right now. I'm in my inventory, which is like my stash of assets. And I'll bring one in from Italy, where I just was for about 6 months, because the baby I mentioned came out 2 months premature over there. So that was the whole thing. But here's a 360 photo. I just popped it up. We have some language teachers, by the way, who use this feature. They have 360 photos of like locations around the world that have a lot of signage, like inside a mall in Spain, where there's all sorts of signage, and people can just look around and you practice kind of like translating the signs and things like that. You can pull up a laser pointer and stuff like that. Okay, So that's sort of a high level of like what Frame is. A very easy way to just come together with other people in a 3D immersive space from the browser, and very easy to customize it a number of ways. You can also bring in your own 3D models entirely as the 3D environment. I'm not sure if the format here is like wait till questions at the end, but I have a good look at like the center of this room. If any of you do have questions and you want to just stop me, like if you raise your hand, like it's all good. I know I'm kind of motor mouthing through a lot of things here. Okay. I wanted to touch on a couple ways that teachers and their students are using this thing. And certainly a very common one is like sort of creating showcases of student work, like, a way to display like learning artifacts, and then creating sort of like virtual museums or walkthroughs that showcase all this work. So this is one that's interesting because it kind of pairs, it's about learning about Beethoven, and it sort of pairs like audio with images. And so you kind of go through these different sections and you're listening to different songs and like seeing the pair up between the audio and the image, kind of just like the basics of like multimedia, multimodal stuff. But then I was in for a session when they had the whole like class and other classes gathering in here, exploring it. And you can see the different voice zones on the ground here so that people in zone 4 can have their own conversations separate from the chaos of zone 3 and things like that. But we've seen a lot of teachers just have a lot of fun with this idea of like, rather than setting up like a website that kind of tries to organize this, that organizing it spatially actually feels pretty natural and sensible. And it facilitates the conversations you can have on top of it just by positioning this stuff inside of a 3D space that has avatars and voice chat and video and so forth. But yeah, this is super common. This person got a little bit fancier. You're not limited to our environments. We have like 20 different 3D environments you can choose from. But as I said, you can upload your own. So you can see in this one, this person created their own like gorgeous 3D gallery. We didn't make this, and set up a bunch of work. I think this was some kind of art contest that was set up inside of it, which is pretty cool. But another important thing to know about Frame, like the way we think about the metaverse sort of generally is that to us, the web browser kind of always has been the metaverse. It's like the only thing that exists out there that connects different but related destinations, and it's already been doing that, like outside of any particular walled garden and things like that. And every frame just is its own website. So navigating from one to another is just as easy as moving from one website to another. So this teacher had every student set up their own different frame dealing with a different topic. So this gallery here is like a gallery of galleries. So each of these links on the wall actually takes you to another frame that student set up with like information related to that particular topic. This is about like work and energy. You see that students kind of set up all sorts of videos. There's a cool little like navigation path around the space that she has set up, but pretty cool. And maybe a practical tip if you dive into Frame yourself is that don't try to cram everything into the same frame because it'll get packed. Like this is another sort of sacrifice we make by making Frame a website, is that you can't have like 500 different 3D models in the same frame. You can't have 1,000 images up on the wall. There are limitations that if you test, the frame might get a little bit laggier. So this teacher made the call, like, just give each student their own frame to work with, and then make a frame that links out to all of those other frames, which makes sense. Okay. Now, besides, a lot of what we've seen so far is around like 2D content, like, which I still think is just positioning 2D content inside of a 3D space, I think can yield really interesting results and make sense for a lot of reasons. But often we see the use of like 3D models as a way to make these spaces a little bit more interesting, but also fill them with like relevant sort of learning content. Like this teacher here made something, a frame kind of about Mars and found a 3D model of a rover to help supplement everything else around it. And there are also 360 photos of Mars that you can kind of like pop up and view. See, it's like cool little holder for this 360 photo that I can click on, and then here it is, right, which is pretty sweet. So this teacher went a little bit fancier than, yes, there's 2D stuff on walls, but there are also 360 photos. There are also 3D models, which is pretty sweet. Now, where I think a really interesting opportunity is, like, a little bit about myself. I mean, I started out as a Latin teacher in Los Angeles, and then got interested in education technology, and eventually ended up doing my graduate research at UC Santa Barbara on teachers and students using 3D worlds for online learning. And so and the lion's share of the research at the time was on Second Life. And to be honest, like, it still is. Like, Second Life is still big. Second Life is still big in the education research community, like, as it should be. And I wasn't like a developer by training, but it was getting into, like, I kind of found myself motivated to learn how to code by experimenting with a lot of these platforms. It was like scripting in Second Life, but then that took me into JavaScript, and then that took me into everything I've learned, that now I'm like managing a team of engineers building this thing and doing a lot of the coding myself. But I think my point is, like, these 3D spaces can really be vehicles to encourage student creativity and your own creativity. So this teacher, they started out pretty simple, but then students started asking her, how do I create my own 3D models? And it's not like these are particularly fancy or like very sophisticated, but I'm pretty sure this was middle school students who got motivated to learn how to create 3D models that then were able to be brought into this space, because you can bring 3D models right in here. So I think the tool used here was Tinkercad, because really most 3D design software, like, you open it up and it makes you just want to rip your hair out, or in my case, just smack my head on the hair left. But like, you open up something like Blender, which is very sophisticated, and you can often just get lost or kind of demotivated because it's so complex. You never think that you're ever going to be able to get your head around it. But Tinkercad is like very simple, and it was simple enough that a middle schooler could go in and create these things. So this is pretty cool, and we've seen this happen with 360 photos too, where all of a sudden a teacher or a student goes, "Wait, I can bring in these 360 photos. Yeah, I can find some online, but how do I make these? Can I make these?" And it turns out, yeah, you can. You can even use your iPhone. You don't need a fancy 360-degree camera. Now, I do have one of these, this 360 camera, and anyone who's into the 360 stuff, highly recommend. Like, these are very cool devices. But yeah, I mean, I went on a ramble here. I think my overall point is we've seen people get pretty motivated to just learn things just by virtue of seeing other projects. Oh my God, what's that? Can I do that? And then all of a sudden, they've learned the basics of 3D modeling. And once you know the basics that even Tinkercad teaches you, then when you open something up like Blender, you might have that foothold you need to just not get so discouraged and things like that. So it can just start that journey. And again, not just for students, it can start it for you. I'm not sure where all of you are in your own journeys with this stuff, but it's never too late. Okay, nice. Now, I want to talk about this space, and I hope the screen share like does it justice. I know screen share usually like brutalizes the resolution of things, but I hope this still like looks pretty darn good from where you see it. So we see some people who are very interested in doing trainings in a space that really looks like a particular real world location. And getting a 3D model of a space that looks like a real world location is not easy. You can have 3D modelers like do it from scratch, where they open up Blender and look at images of of the space, and they try to make a 3D model of it. It's a challenging process. We've done this before for clients who want like a digital twin of a particular space. But there's a new technique out there. Well, it's not new, but it's recently become very refined and good, called photogrammetry, which is the creation of a 3D model based on photographs of that space. So this environment here was a showcase that we did, and this is in frame, by the way. Like, It's actually one of our environments called the Norfolk Cloister. This is a wing of an Elizabethan like architectural structure that has a garden in the middle. This is like actually a space, in England. And this was created with photogrammetry. So a lot of photos were taken of this hallway, piped into some software, and the result is this 3D model. Like this isn't a 360 photo, right? A 360 photo is just mapped around the camera and you can't really navigate through it spatially. But this is actually a 3D model. And the tools for this now have gotten, 10 years ago, doing photogrammetry scan was almost impossible unless you had thousands of dollars worth of gear. But you can actually do these scans now with your iPhone. If you've got an iPhone 12 or later, they have a LiDAR scanner in one of the cameras. And there are applications, you basically just walk around the space and it creates the mesh for you. And it's quite good. I encourage you to check out this application if you're interested in creating these environments that are based on real world spaces. The app is called Polycam, and it's free unless you try to make a ton of different scans. But yeah, we're seeing this as very much an area of interest, like people who want to do trainings or classes in 3D environments that really look true to their real world like counterpart. And yeah, generally speaking, this is called like a digital twin. And there are many of them out there. Okay, cool. Now, this is another one. This one looks a little bit rougher. This is from a Matterport camera. Matterport's a camera company. They make these cameras that you put into houses and it creates a big scan. Has anyone heard of Matterport?
Yes.
Yes, no, it's okay. Matterport's pretty cool. But I think now that this stuff is kind of on the phone, Matterport might be in trouble. But just want to say this is an example of like a scan from Matterport taken of an entire like house. Now the quality is not great. You can see there's a lot of ripping around the chairs. A lot of the detail really, as soon as you look close, starts looking a little bit warped. That's because it's still, these tools for photogrammetry are still right on the cusp, I'd say, of being like really great. Even the ones that you take with Polycam, they might not have this warping, but the file might be so big that Frame can't handle the upload of it. So it might take a little bit of optimization. But my overall point, I think, is that we're very close to these tools being very good. Already, tinkerers are making like incredible things using photogrammetry tools. This one is actually used by real estate agents who are giving property tours. I'm not sure if that fits under the purview of like training, learning and training, which I know is supposed to be the emphasis here, but it sort of does. I mean, these are people who are trying to help other people understand a space and learn about it. So it's pretty cool. I'm actually on the hunt for houses myself. So my head is more in the real estate space than it's used to being in. Certainly been looking in San Luis Obispo where I can't afford anything, but where it's fun to look for stuff.
Yep.
Yep.
I live in a garage.
What's that?
I live in a garage.
Yeah, well, the garage is there. I mean, the price for a garage there in somewhere like Kansas, you basically can get a mansion. It's pretty nuts. But here in Goleta, it's no different. So just spend my days in the metaverse, and I forget. It's all good. Okay. I wanted to quickly highlight. I know I've only got 10 minutes left, I think. Or maybe 5 and then questions, not entirely sure, but I'll rip through a few things here. We recently built, we have a lot of questions from teachers about how do you get data from this to something like a learning management system? Because a lot of teachers use learning management systems and they want a way for like activity in the metaverse to kind of translate over there. So I just want to point out one new feature in Frame that is kind of relevant to this and relevant to a lot of other things, and it's called an action editor. And the reason we built this feature is because we found that people often want to do more than just displaying stuff in the world. They want to make things so that when you click on a button, a particular action can happen. And usually to get this done, you would need to be a programmer. I mean, you would need to open up something like Unity 3D or the Unreal Engine, these kind of like sophisticated game engines that like you open up and just like Blender, you just want to close them down because you think like, what the heck is going on? So we tried to make something in Frame that let you like create different kinds of interactivity without writing a line of code, kind of this like no code interaction editor. And the way it works is pretty simple. Like I've selected my little text button here, and I've gone to this action editor, and here's my text label. And you just pick like add a trigger, and you've got two options, click or proximity. And we're going to add more triggers to this. But what it, if I click on click, then what this means is I'm setting up an action that will happen when users click on this text label, right? Like I'm making a button. It's not like too complicated here. And then the actions I can add, I've got a few. One of them that's really interesting for those that have like access to some APIs. Maybe you have the API for an analytics system, or like the Canvas LMS has an API. You can just call a REST API call. So if you know the REST API endpoint for like, tracking this bit of data in some system, you can just call the API, which is pretty cool. But you can also manipulate stuff inside a frame. You can make a button so when people click on it, it plays a video or plays a piece of audio. If you've got a 3D model with animations, you can make a button that plays or stops those animations. If you just want to manipulate some other asset, you can do that too. So I clicked on the action I want to do is a set property. And that means I can change the properties of another asset in the frame, which is pretty cool. I'm going to pick, let's see, I'll pick, I thought I had a whiteboard in here. I'll pick a whiteboard, and the property I want to change is its scale, its size. So I could change position or rotation or scale, and I want to scale it up to like 4. So now I've just made it so when I click on this button, it'll scale up the whiteboard. Now I saw 2 whiteboards in the space, so I feel like I'm missing one of them, or one of them is behind a wall. So I kind of expected it to scale this one up, but I feel like I had the wrong one picked. But just conceptually, this idea is like, we're trying to make it so that you can build interactivity in your frame without needing to learn how to code or write code or open up a complicated game engine. And we'll be adding a lot more to this soon. The other trigger, by the way, is really interesting. Instead of click or tap, it's proximity. And that means when people get close to the asset. So if I make an action here now, then that action will go off if people get close to my text label, which is pretty cool. Nice. So, if you say you're setting up like a learning journey where you only want certain assets to appear once people have moved to certain places in the frame or clicked on certain things, then you can set all that up. All right, nice. Now, finally, as promised, I want to talk a little bit about augmented reality and kind of what that means for Frame and how we are thinking about Frame. So I imagine many of you know the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality. I won't belabor it. VR is when you're kind of fully immersed in a space. Maybe you're in a headset where you don't see the outside world at all. You're just fully immersed in whatever space the headset is presenting to you in the lenses. Augmented reality is a little bit different. Augmented reality, you're looking you're looking into the real world, and there's a digital overlay on top of it. So you're seeing like what's in front of you, but there might be a digital overlay on top of what you're seeing. This is like just AR kind of in a nutshell. Now, Apple has recently kind of like reinvigorated this whole discussion about, honestly, about VR and immersive technology and AR generally with the recent launch of their Vision Pro. Now, there are a lot of people like scoffing at the Vision Pro because of its exorbitant price tag of like $3,000 or $4,000, which absolutely is exorbitant. I wouldn't really underestimate like Apple in this area. They've kind of done this now to a few categories of products where next thing you know, like it's sort of mainstream or mainstream enough to where we need to be paying attention to it. So Apple's Vision Pro is really like really bullish on augmented reality. Like if you looked at the promotional video for it, a lot of it is people looking out at their real world, but then there's a digital overlay on top of it. But I think this gets really interesting for the metaverse, and to me, it opens up tons of really interesting learning and training opportunities where people are walking around actual physical real world spaces, but there's a digital overlay on top of it that helps them make sense of it, that helps them learn about different aspects of it. And I think this is going to be a big deal. So I'm thinking, okay, what am I doing for Frame? Like I'm trying to position Frame so that it's kind of ready for augmented reality. But what does that mean? Right now, Frame really assumes that people are in the same 3D space that's different from any particular real world space. So what we're doing for Frame is we're basically making it so that you can use Frame to create these digital overlays that can get overlaid on real world locations. Now, I'm going to go into a weird little space right now, but try to bear with me. And I wish I had a video to show you this, but I've only just seen this working yesterday. We've been frantically like working on a prototype for this. So I mentioned the application before on your iPhone that you can use to walk around a real world location and get a 3D model of it. The application is called Polycam. What I did last week was I went downstairs in my apartment and I walked around my downstairs with Polycam and I got a 3D model of the downstairs of my apartment. Then I brought that 3D model into Frame. So imagine this 3D environment that I'm in is actually like a 3D model of a real world art gallery that looks just like this. Okay. And I did this for my apartment. Then I had this 3D model of my apartment, or let's use this art gallery as an example. You've got this 3D model of a real world, true to scale location in Frame. Well, Frame gives you all these tools to like layer media on top of the space. So you want this text label on the wall, right? Just like snap it there. Bring in a web browser, bring in a text label that is updating every 5 seconds based on a REST API call where you're pulling in live data from somewhere. Bring in 3D models on top of it. And then I clicked like save. And then I went downstairs to I just walked downstairs, right, away from my computer. I put on the Oculus Quest 2 headset, which has like augmented reality mode. It has like these pass-through cameras, so you can actually look out at the real world from your VR headset. And I saw the overlay that I had made in Frame on my physical walls as I was like looking out at the real world. Like I saw my images that I put up on the walls in Frame. I saw them on my actual like walls. So my point is like, as augmented reality gets bigger, people are going to be looking for the tools to create these overlays on top of physical reality. And Frame will be one of those tools. You'll just have to create the 3D model of your real world space, bring it into Frame, and then position things just where you want. And then when you go to that physical location with your augmented reality glasses, you'll be able to see that digital content overlay on top of the real world. So yeah, bit of a tangent there, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about augmented reality because I think it's going to be a big deal, and just wanted to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about that on the Frame side. All right, I rambled about like a whole bunch of stuff there in 30 minutes. I hope some of it was interesting or relevant. I'm looking at some people. Hope it was okay. I see someone nodding. I'm not sure if I've got like a hard cutoff here at 11:30. Maybe there's another session starting. But if anyone has any questions, I don't know. Happy to field any if I've got time.
Any questions?
I've got a question. First, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you showing off Frame and kind of getting it from the horse's mouth. And I'm a bit of an early adopter of this system as well. But one of the things that I'm curious about that I've been hoping for and looking for a while is I think many of us as educators are interested in usage and how our learners are using it. We call it learning analytics in this space. Since you work in ed tech, you're familiar with it. Can you speak to that? Is that on the roadmap, or can you maybe show sneak peek or preview?
Yep, absolutely. So great question and great point. Like, how do you know what's been going on in your frame, and kind of basic like analytics? So just recently we launched a feature that is like a basic like analytics sort of module in Frame. So if you click on this little chart icon in your sidebar, you'll see this pop up. And this is kind of interesting because it'll give you, yes, things like general like traffic, just for your own like purposes there to see how many hits it's getting. But you also get this kind of like activity feed where you can see specifically who has done particular actions. So I'm seeing things like so-and-so connected to Frame at this time. I see so-and-so added a particular asset at this time, and I see what the asset type is and things like that. You can also see poll responses. You can see who entered which voice zones. So you can see which voice zones are kind of the hotspots. And that's also tracked here with voice zones entered. And you can see which, like kind of which area of the frame is most popular from that perspective. So I think we've gotten to a good start with this. I bet it's not quite as fleshed out as you'd like it to be, but we at least have the foundation here for some decent analytics.
Can I follow up on that real quick?
Yeah, please.
So if you have the capability of inserting the triggers and then feeding those into a database or a log or what have you, do you have other triggers that exist within your code base that are not necessarily being exposed on the dashboard?
Yes. So yeah, the only triggers we've just exposed right now, I mentioned like click and sort of proximity, like move close to. There are tons of other triggers that we just have yet to expose on the front end that we have access to on the back end.
Sounds like really exciting things are happening. I look forward to seeing where this goes next. Thank you.
Of course.
Hi, thanks for this, Gabe. I was wondering how many instructors are using this for synchronous courses, whether if they're holding class inside Frame, and how many people can be inside of Frame at once?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, we don't recommend more than 100 people in the same frame at one time. And that has caveats, because if you've got 100 people in there, then sometimes you need to be a little bit more cautious about how many assets you have in there. It's kind of this delicate dance that you have to do to ensure decent performance and stability. And also, as soon as you're starting to push above 50 people at once, that's when you really want to come in on desktop or laptop or Chromebook. It doesn't need to be a fancy one, but if you're on mobile, it'll start to struggle in those kind of larger scale meetings. Now, we are actively working on scale pretty aggressively. And I think by the end of the year, this number is actually going to be more like 1,000 if you're having these kind of auditorium style events, which I know isn't always the use case, but just putting it out so that you know. And then I think out of the percentage of teachers who use it for synchronous learning versus more like just students kind of setting up spaces to be explored like at their own time, not necessarily like multi-user interactions, it's about half and half. But a lot of them do sort of both, where yes, you have like online classes in here, but then students get so into it that they end up wanting to like make their own frames and stuff like that.
So thank you very much. This is transformational for me because I'm an environmental scientist and we're trying to develop field labs for environmental science. So my question is that, either a 360 video or not a 360 video, a 360 picture, right? Or a picture taken with Polycam, right? So you take it, you bring it into the frame, right? And then you put a digital overlay on it. So, you have students identify things in the environment or, right? And then do you have to look, can you look at this on the computer then? Can you just look at it in frame, or do you have to have glasses to look at this overlay?
Yeah, no, totally. You can absolutely look at it in frame. And really that's primarily what people do with it now. Like, if you had a 3D model of your lab, you could bring that in, or a 360 photo of it. You could bring that in and then kind of like digitally annotate it, and then anyone could come into Frame on their browser and explore those annotations and explore the lab. Someone in another country could come in and check out the lab and learn all about it. What I was hinting at with like needing the glasses was a few years down the line, I think augmented reality glasses will be mainstream. These will be glasses that look just like regular glasses, and you're looking out at the real world. And people in your lab physically with those glasses would then also be able to see those annotations that people set up in the digital environment on top of the 3D model in Frame, but they'd be able to see that in the real world as they're just walking around the lab, which I know is a bit of a mind bender. It's like, but once you have a 1-to-1 scale digital twin of a space, it opens up those possibilities where someone from a computer in Frame could be in there walking around it as an avatar, putting an image up on a wall, but then someone who's actually at the lab with these augmented reality glasses on would also see that image on the wall as they were actually just walking around the physical lab. Yeah, I hope I answered your question there. Yes, I think the answer is yes.
I'm struggling with though is the resolution of the picture. So
Yeah.
In a field situation where you have like a landscape,
Yep.
As you get further away, I mean, I'm hoping that the 360 pictures get better so that you can see things further away and identify things or zoom in to certain aspects of the picture.
Yep, and sometimes for really large spaces, like, yeah, you're right, one 360 photo just often doesn't cut it because, I mean, there's only so far it can look, I guess, with clarity. So sometimes what people do is they'll get a few different 360 photos, at different like ranges, and then you can kind of like navigate between them in Frame. But I think the holy grail of this really is generating really good 3D models of these locations, because that's even better than 360 photos. When you have a 3D model of the whole space, then you can really walk around it as avatars instead of, the 360 photos just mapped around your perspective. So you can look around and use your laser pointer, but you can't move around the space in the way that you really want to be able to do, like in the way that I'm able to do in this space. If this were just a 360 photo, I wouldn't really be able to like walk down the hall like this. If I had a few different 360 photos of this place in the hall and a little farther down the hall, yeah, I could jump from one to the other, but it's not the same as having like the actual 3D model.
Thank you. Yes,
I wanted to touch on what formats are you using for your 3D model?
So for our 3D models, and I know this is a very contentious topic in the art community, like which 3D model format to support. We support a format called GLTF, and we like GLTF, and in fact, and specifically .glb, which is when you take all the meshes and the textures associated with the GLTF and it's packed into one file. We like GLB because it's an open source format. It's not like proprietary to a particular like piece of software. And we're seeing a lot of different 3D design softwares now support export to GLTF or GLB. We specifically use Blender, which we think has the very best like GLB exporter, but even like Maya and Tinkercad, I mentioned that one that the middle schoolers were using, they all can export to GLB.
Yeah, that's what we're doing, working with Blender, but like you said, it is difficult, especially with students to try and work on the 3D.
Yeah, it's challenging. I remember Blender before version 2.8, like I would open up Blender and I would just want to like leave the field of working with computers at all. Like, it was seriously such a challenge. And then 2.8, they actually did a very real dramatic UI overhaul, which actually made it to where I could open it up and do some very basic things, but it's not easy. I think there's probably room in the market, to be honest, for a whole class of 3D modeling tools that are a lot easier than Blender, that still let you make sophisticated things. And to be honest, I'm surprised that there's not a lot more things kind of in that area.
I believe iScan actually takes it directly, in regards to the scanner, it's actually creating the GLTF. You don't have to go through Blender. It's actually in collaboration with Blender as part of that scanner. And so that's what we're applying on those now to see if that step that we have to use in Blender with the scanner.
I like very much what you've done with FrameVR, and I've been following you for quite some time. I think you cracked it with photogrammetry in there. I personally want to check how well the system behaves with the complexity of the models that we throw in there, plus bringing students in. It's fantastic this tool provided to teachers because it enables them to be creative and use it in ways that they want to facilitate their the pedagogical objectives. How far is it for integrating interaction there? And I know you've got objects and you can interact with the objects themselves, but what I mean with interactivity meaning adding some gamified elements, being able to add milestones and follow if you're still in the completing a series of tasks that you're assigning to do that. How far is it?
I'd say it's still pretty hard, but in contrast to where it was a couple months ago, it's at least possible now to do some of that stuff. Like that action editor that I mentioned, where you can set up different actions. It's not necessarily the easiest to use, but really with that tool, you can actually start setting up, different learning journeys. Like you can make different content appear only when the user has done certain things. But I would say overall, like this is an area of pretty close like focus for us right now. So I think you're going to see some big improvements kind of in this area, like letting you set up those kinds of things without too much struggle.
Thank you. We have, there's very warm interest from people here. I think I'll allow 2 more questions and then we have to close the session.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say a comment about how like development of also like the alternative, like a project-based learning and how grading can be based on like having students be creators and having them build the environment, storytelling, like all that is super good. So that's also an alternative for that.
Yeah, sorry, can you rephrase the question there really fast?
Oh, no, it was just a comment of how like grading doesn't have to be quantitative. It can be based on storytelling and building the environment.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, all I can say is I agree.
I just wanted to ask about how students are been using this and how you can actually use Frame. I've never used it, it looks fantastic. How you can use Frame to get students to collaborate with each other, how conscious they are of other students being presenting in there and how consistent is the presence. And so has it been used for collaborative work? It could be just, having a few students watching the same material, the same video at the same time and then be able to discuss it together.
Yep. So like this frame here is an example of, this is like a bunch of students that came together. They had different groups within their large class, but they were like all in here working together to create this space, and then viewing it and looking at it and talking about it together as they cycle through these different spaces. Now, there's a challenge here. There's like a whole other very interesting talk, and I'm sure many of you, maybe even at iLRN, have sessions on this. There's a whole topic around like the beauty of this, but also like the concerns with it. Like we have some teachers who they don't really necessarily they actually don't allow students to come together in a frame together unless the teacher is there. Because all of the things that I'm not sure what age of students you all are used to working with, but like in middle school and high school, certainly like virtual bullying just generally is like a very real thing. All the things that can happen in the real world, besides like physical violence itself, can also happen in the virtual world. So it's the kind of thing you want to do with caution. It depends on the age of your students and their maturity. We do have some teachers who do just like, they feel very secure in their students' maturity level. So they're perfectly fine having students collaborate on a frame together. They might be in there just working on separate homework together. It's just the way that they come together online. They might be in there like actually creating a space together, but it depends. And there are lots of interesting questions around, some of these issues that I didn't have time to get into today, but I hope many of you are thinking about and
We did
researching.
group work presentations, so I set up group work for my students. And during COVID, because we wanted to try different things just to keep them engaged. One of the sessions was using FrameVR presentations. We've used it as well for Gabe's hackathon that we had, where we brought students from different international students, so they had to gather in this space to demo their applications. It's pretty.
Yes, I was also thinking about education. Can you limit what students can do? Can you give access to certain functions and not, so that would prevent maybe certain behaviors?
Yeah, you absolutely can. So when you're an admin of a frame, and you can have multiple admins, by the way, but we let you get pretty granular with the permissions. So hopefully you can see on the screen share, but like over here, like I can set specifically who can edit the frame. You can of course set who can view the frame. You can restrict who can connect to the frame. You can restrict who can share their camera, who can mute or unmute. One teacher said, all my students are blasting out emojis at me in a way that I don't like. I need to restrict the emoji feature. So we did it. We restricted it. So you can get pretty granular with the permissions. A request we're hearing lately is teachers actually, at a certain point, they want to freeze the movement of everyone in the frame besides the teacher. And this is really interesting. They want to actually just like freeze people in place, as if I could just freeze all of you right now to force you to pay attention to me, so you couldn't even move from your seats. And we're probably going to build this for that teacher, just because we've heard it from a few of them. But once you have frozen people in their seats, I think there are interesting questions around to what extent it actually makes sense to be in the metaverse versus a regular, video call. But they say, oh no, we still want to be able to bring in 3D models and manipulate them and bring in 360 photos, and you can't do that stuff on a Zoom call. And they're right. So we'll build it for them. It's not up to us to make these decisions. We're happy to leave those decisions in the hands of the teachers.
Well, thank you very much. I think your presentation generated lots of interest in here and inspired people on how to use this tool. And I personally want to use this with photography. I'm going to do some experimentation with that. Thank you very much. And, yeah.
Cool. Thank you all for joining. If any of you have follow-up questions or you want a tour of Frame, I'm at Gabe at FrameVR.io, and I put a link to my LinkedIn there in the Zoom text chat. I'm not sure how accessible that is to everyone, but just email me. I'm Gabe at FrameVR.io. I see some Latin there in the Zoom text chat, calling out to my former Latin teacher days. That's nice. Appreciate the time you spent with me, and onwards and outwards. Good luck with your journeys.